All right, everyone. I am excited to introduce my next guest. Loved him in The Shawshank Redemption, Demolition Man, Argo. Also, star of The Stage, Evita, Sweeney Todd, and a million other credits that we'll cover as we go. We need to get to the interview, right? Like, please welcome to the show, Perón, 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 the amazing Bob Gunton. How are you, sir?
I'm fine, and don't cry for me, Argentina. I'm just fine.
I have to say, my mom had a thing where if she liked music, she would play it nonstop. That was just over and over and over again. And one of the things that she would play nonstop was the Evita Broadway soundtrack. So growing up, I must have heard it a million times. And so when I started collecting vinyl, when I would go get vinyl, inevitably, even if I didn't, like, I'll grab like Barbra Streisand or Barry Manilow's, things that my parents love that I listen to. And then, but inevitably, what that also means is I've got copies of you on vinyl. I listened to it, put it on it yesterday, but this is great. Do you have this? There's a great picture of you in here, by the way.
I think there's behind me a Evita poster somewhere.
You got the poster behind you. Yeah, it's just, but it was okay. It had like the booklet. I could sing along with you if you want to go into one of the songs. And like,
not sure I'm ready for that, Jeff.
Maybe none of us are ready for it, but it's like, but I was so excited. Like, I'm like, oh wait, gosh, I've got Bob on vinyl. Actually, somehow I ended up with 3 copies too. So I must have like before I was good at writing down what I had.
Since I presume you listened to it too when your mom did, if you were in the area, I have a kind of an interesting little tidbit about people who've listened to the album and maybe not have seen the show. I auditioned for Hal Prince, and I had, like everybody else, 16 bars to sing She's a Diamond. I wanted to go in there with a Perón-like machismo and this kind of elevated sense that political people, and particularly despots, seem to have. So somewhere I had cavalry boots that went up almost to my knees. And I don't know why I thought that was kind of martial looking. And then a 3-piece suit because I didn't have my Class A uniform anymore from the Army. And I wore my hair slicked back, and I didn't have the putty nose yet. That was to come. So I went out there and I sang. I got the greatest reaction. He said, "That's it." And he was sitting in the back of the theater, and I presumed he was there. I didn't know. Eventually I was cast. They trotted me before Andrew Lloyd Webber, and thumbs were up. So I was cast, and we all gathered for the first rehearsal, and we ran through the show. I had always felt that for me as an actor, and I think this is true of a lot of people who do accents and character stuff, even some great leads like Meryl, find that speaking the language as if you were, in my case, an Argentine highbrow, trying his best to speak the perfect English, but it is impossible because I still, So that's how I auditioned when I sang, and so that's what I did in the first rehearsal. Everybody sang along, and it was fun. And then the next day we started to dive in to really block the show, etc. And I had noticed in that first rehearsal that nobody else sounded vaguely Hispanic. Even some folks who actually were a little Hispanic, and I'm not a bit. So I thought, oh, God, I guess I'm going to have to toss that in the can. So I reported the first day of rehearsal. I sang whatever he sang. And at the end of rehearsal, privately, Hal came up to me and he said, "Hey, kid, what's going on?" And I said, He said, "You're missing something. I want to see the Perón I saw at the audition." So I said, "Well, that's probably my pseudo Spanish accent. Put it in." That was it. And that's the way he talks too. Did talk, God bless him. So I did. I went in, and for 18 months, I sang "She's a Diamond in the Cool," whatever it is. I didn't think much of it one way or the other, except that I know that when I am singing that way, my body is different. So come to see, years and years later, I happened to watch the Tony performance of one of the big ensemble numbers from Evita, which had been filmed for CBS. Under all the comments, there was one that said, "How come Perón's the only one with an accent?" And I could hear in my mind this, people always trying to point out anomalies and anachronisms and stuff. In this case, didn't make any sense to him. I thought if I ever had to answer, I'd say, Hal Prince made me, But it's true, when I do an accent, and I've done a number of them, they just change my bodily presentation and sometimes even how I think as the character. So that's my Evita story.
That is a great story. And you had some excellent coworkers on this.
Top of the top.
Top of the top. Patti LuPone and Mandy Patinkin. This is how I knew he sang. And yes, I did listen to it over and over again because when the movie came out, we ended up seeing that together. So it was like, I've probably seen that a ton too. Not that I want you to, but like in my head, I was like, oh, I bet people ask him quotes all the time. And like the only quote I could think of, it'd be like, I could find job satisfaction in Paraguay. There's something about
Paraguay.
that.
Yeah.
There's something about that line. That just, I don't know.
He sounds like a businessman at that point, or as what I thought he was, a little bit lily-livered. His strength primarily, in my estimation, from this gorgeous trinket and representative of the people. And when she's up there and crying with her love for Argentine people, and it goes from Perón, Perón, Evita, Evita. In my mind, and I think if you watched it closely, if it was actually in the ad we used to have for that, you'll see him register, oh, that's what I need to cling to power, is to have that emotional and simpatico, glamorous woman by my side. And from then on, it's a done deal.
Yes, I agree with that analysis. So, all right, so you nominated for a Tony Award, but you won the Drama Desk Award, which I looked up, and that's the most prestigious honor in New York theater. And you've won that multiple times.
Yeah, they're hanging up here with my Al Hirschfelds, which to me, various awards and stuff to the side, having been in, I think, 7 or 8 Hirschfelds, and every one of them has a Nina. And that was like a little tiara that he handed out to performances that especially caught his eye. So I always took that as being maybe my best reaction to performances is Abe Hirschfeld.
When you're doing the first Broadway version of a play like Evita, do you go and see the West End version first? That's because it was already in London. Like, any connection there, or is it all just okay? Hal Prince is just, this is how we're doing ours type thing.
Yeah, well, he sort of said that this is an American production. There are other changes that he made in it before we began rehearsal. No, I don't. Unless I'm really, I need the plot explained to me better. And if it's, I wouldn't fly to London for that. Inevitably, because I've done some revivals. For instance, when I did Sweeney Todd, I had seen Len Cariou and Angela Lansbury's performances several times. And ironically, it was in the theater above the one in which I was doing the revival. But our production was so different. The focus of it was not on socio-political slavery and all the caste system in Victorian England. Ours was about a family that gets really screwed, and a man who is unjustly sent away for, I think it's 15 years or something, in exile, and comes back, and his wife is dead, or so he thinks, and his daughter is about to be deflowered by the same scumbag that sent him to Devil's Island or wherever it was. It kind of comes in to focus in a way that actually the Circle in the Square was a theater below the whatever the other one was called then. So it needed to be more intimate. And it was because of the way it was orchestrated, too. The fact that it was great for me because Sweeney is someone who has lost, in a way, both his wife and his daughter. And at the time, my wife and my daughter were not lost. They were actually in the audience and scared the hell out of my daughter. And when Sweeney goes nuts, she'd never seen her dad do that. But anyway, put buttons in me. Whenever Sweeney would refer to his wife or his daughter, it was like attached to something deep down there. So I had seen Len, and it really didn't affect my performance because it was just a different feel, and I'm obviously a different person. I love what he did. I love what George Hearn did, but my own was my own, and I'm glad of that. And that was my last Broadway show, and I came out to California, with my home state, with my wife and daughter, and we wanted to have a change, particularly for my daughter she was a very outdoorsy person, and New York just wasn't the place for that.
That was in like 89 for a few years. That was your last stage. Do you miss the stage then?
I do, and I've been able to do two of my absolute favorite musicals, both of which I saw and loved out here in California. Let me say part of the reason of bidding farewell to New York theater was that I felt that with Sweeney, I had climbed Mount Everest, and everything else that was around then, jukebox musicals and that kind of stuff, just didn't beckon to me at all. And that's part of the reason we went to California. But anyway, out here, I got to do Follies, playing Ben, my most fun ever in a musical on the 20th century. And I played it, forget about Oscar Jaffe. I tried to be John Barrymore. And I know I ain't got the beak for it or the gorgiosity, but I have the chutzpah. And it was wonderful. I played opposite Carolee Carmello, who is just a wonderful, wonderful performer, singer, comedian, actress. And those are two of on my wish list forever. And I had to come out to California to do them. So paid off for me internally.
And kudos on your pronunciation of chutzpah. You nailed it. For a Gentile, you nailed that.
If you live in New York 20 years and you don't have a little bit of that in you, then you're mashuga, And I've played a lot, since I came out here. On one of the last plays I did, actually, I went back to New York to do that. And a brief film, I played a Jewish gentleman, older, my own age, and both of them were named Mort. All of the stuff I had absorbed for 20 years in New York, and it's not the cliche stuff, but it's the kind of energy and the sarcasm and all of this stuff that I associate, great stuff, with Jewish actors that I particularly love. So I got to do that again, basically while I was out here. So and my first play I ever did at the University of California at Irvine was sort of written for me. It was called The Death of Morris Biederman. So in that case, that was one of the first serious plays I ever did. I'd done musicals and operettas and all that stuff for years before, but I'd never tackled anything that was really not singing in it. It was very well received. And, I've sort of bookended my career playing Jewish men. And in both cases, they were older than I am. But the last two I did, I'm 80 now. So I've finally grown into my age. It's not, also, I get to play some of the other work I've done, grandfatherly types, rather than the psycho next door or whatever else I've been asked to do. And it's nice because I am a grandfather. I have a lot of that stuff in me. It just never is asked for the most part in film.
And I mean, when I ask this question, I mean in your heart. Is do you consider yourself a theater actor that's done TV and movies, or an actor that did theater? What do you think of yourself primarily? Because you did a lot of theater and you've done a lot of both. But
yeah, I never stopped being a theater actor. Now, there are adjustments you have to make when it's into a camera, and particularly when shots, as they did in Shawshank, come in maybe for some of the first times in my life, and because they think the audience wants to see what this guy is thinking, not just what he's doing. And all of that comes from theater. To whatever extent I've done well in film, it's because I'm a theater actor. And you ask most casting directors in LA, and they'll say, let's find a theater guy for this. So I'm forever dead. And also, that was my dream. After I got back from Vietnam, I decided, rather than being something just for money and whatever, I said, I made it through that. I'm not going to do anything that I'm not passionate about, that I don't love. And that was theater. And that's when I came to New York. But I'm a theater actor. Come on. You can tell because I'm over emoting already.
If you don't mind, I like, in terms of Vietnam, thank you for your service, Bronze Star. And like, as I was doing some research and this part of your chapter came up, the Battle of Firebase Ripcord and you going back and securing radio. Like, I was like, it read a little bit like a movie. It was like, oh man, this is a story.
If I wasn't so scared, I would have made the same observation. This would make a wonderful film. But at the time, it was just survival. And I'm happy that obviously that it worked out.
No, I mean, now looking back, I imagine at the time, this must have been the most scary thing in the world. What was it that went through your head to like go back to retrieve these radios? Was it orders, or did you know it had to be done and you did it?
Well, the citation for the medal said volunteered. But in Vietnam, particularly if everybody was short, meaning they only had, say, 90 days before they derose, before they're sent back home, your degree of shortness volunteering was meant for the person who was least scheduled soon to go home. In the case of Ripcord, I was pretty short. I think I was about 2 months maybe from leaving, but I wasn't short enough. And so me and another guy volunteered was volunteered to perform this little retrieval.
What was it about these radios that needed to be retrieved?
Well, I was an RTO, a radio operator when I was out with the company and platoon and out in the boonies. And I had been kicked up to what they call Tactical Operations Center, doing the radio there. Besides carrying around the PRC 25, I think it was called, which was the regular thing with the antenna sticking up behind you, it's in your rucksack. Besides carrying that and 2 batteries, you also carried a radio called a Delta One, which scrambled messages. If I had to have my colonel talk to somebody else about tactical stuff and all that, I had to use the Delta One, and it included a punch that had to be used to set it. And the settings changed regularly, but it was basically so that there was no way, even if the North Vietnamese had gotten a hold of one, and even the punch, they wouldn't know what to do with it. But you didn't want to take that chance because they were very, very smart soldiers. So anyway, the Ripcord was getting blown up at the time, and they were evacuating it, and it was a hellscape. And I had left there about 3 or 4 days before this mission that I was volunteered for came up, and the Vietnamese had shot down a big Huey helicopter on the ammo dump up there. So we had not only batteries of artillery and rockets and all that coming in, we had our own stuff cooking off and blowing the place to pieces. And so when I got out of there, I thought, oh, thank God. And 2 days later, I had to go back. And I remember me and the other RTO were in a little Huey helicopter being taken back there. And because of all of the NVA around there, the helicopters to climb up to Ripcord had to basically go like that, so as not to spend a lot of airtime where they can be aimed at. The pilot turned around just as we got there and said, which means they were under attack as we were coming up there. That also means that the helicopter will never land. It will hover for a second, and you better get your ass off of it and then tear off and go down the slope again. So as soon as we got near there, I had to jump. We had to jump out. I ended up in a foxhole. We were on the last helicopter for the day. It was getting dark and helicopters weren't going to function after that. And there still were some people up there defending it. And just as the time, and also the main thing was carrying wounded off. So nobody, even if they were ready to get off, could not until they got the wounded off there. That was when the full weight of what I'd survived really hit me. And from there, it was the beginning of the choice to be in theater, even if I have to sling hash. Didn't turn out to be that way. I was very fortunate to have a nice start and a good trajectory. But Vietnam was the start of my desire and my decision to be in New York theater too. That's the other thing.
Wow, that's an amazing story. I was reading an article on your time. It was talking about how you lost your dog tag, and then decades later, it got returned to you.
That was so weird. I was actually in New York doing a guest thing on, I believe it was Law and Order, and this woman contacted me and said, "I have a dog tag with your name on it." And then she told me this whole story that an American who had gone back fairly recently to see what Vietnam looked like now in peace, and had somehow come across a person in Da Nang who had this whole bucket full of dog tags. Now, how he got them, nobody knows. At first, I thought this was a scam or something. It just sounded too weird. So I checked up on the woman. She's a wonderful woman, and this has been part of her life work since the end of the war. And since the dog tags were purchased and taken back by the American, and he didn't know what to do with them, but he wanted them to be in America, and she volunteered to find the people and match them up with the dog tags. Now, we were all given two, one around the neck, and the other was laced into your boot. And the thinking was, if you ever got blown up, they'd want to have at least a foot with the dog tag so that they could identify the remains. And I don't know how I lost it either. I mean, we had a couple of extractions from the jungle in which we really had to hustle to get on the choppers again. It might have come off then, because I do have the other one. I've had it all my life, and I cherish it. And so anyway, I was in New York, she's in New Jersey, and I have a couple of days off, and I go on the train, and there is this entourage of cops and veterans and members of the local veterans organization, American Legion, whatever it was called. And I had a parade from the train station in Philly to this VFW. I forget what they're called. It's the old-fashioned version of a veterans organization. The sirens were going because there were a lot of cops involved in this, a couple of cars. And I thought, wow, it was really a very emotional moment. And they handed me this little box that was made of plastic. You see through it. And there it was. And I had brought along my the one that had survived on me. And the one they had found was burnt, scorched anyway. It's aluminum, so it didn't melt or anything, but it was scorched and bent. And my other one was sort of pristine, and holding them up together was, maybe I over-dramatized it, but it was very, very touching to me. And I was delighted and still kind of in wonder that somebody in Vietnam collected that and it found its way back into my sock drawer.
That's an amazing story. It really is. Speaking of President Nixon, no, I was kidding.
His was the name on my draft notice He's a very special guy to me. And my father used to call him Old Bowel Jaws because we grew up in California, and everybody knew, at least labor people and Democrats knew about Nixon long before the world found out. I had a chance to play him in a humorous kind of mock documentary called Elvis Meets Nixon. There's another great story. I think it's a great story. Again, I don't look anything like Nixon. I mean, maybe more so now that I've got jowls a little bit. Then I didn't look anything like him, but I wanted to go in and be Nixon. And I've never done that, or I've rarely done that in auditions, walk in character. But I did then, and I walked up to the casting director. I said, "I'm here for the Nixon audition, and I'll wait over here." And I had put things in my nose, plugs to widen it. I couldn't quite get that ski slope of his, and also I put in here. My hair was somewhat of a Nixonian cut, and I wore a suit. I had this kind of version of his speaking style where there's this explosion of something and then it goes back, conversational. And the writer and the director were there. They would laugh their asses off. They said, "Oh, God, we want you to do this." And they had a terrific kid play Nixon. And because he was like 6'4" or something, and I'm 6'1", even the height thing worked out. Because Nixon was obviously shorter than Elvis was. And I thought, oh, this is going to be fun. And then I get a call from my agent saying, the folks at Showtime, which is where this was filmed, who filmed it, they think you're a fine actor and all that, but they just don't see it because they hadn't taped the audition. I had walked in and we just started talking back and forth, and I gave the jokes that I had assembled. The producer never got to see what I did. So I had to go and meet with him, and I did the same thing. I thought it worked one time, maybe it'll work again. And I was even more kind of dedicated to playing him. And he had a McGovern button or some Democratic, no, Ed Muskie. He had a Ed Muskie button on. And I said, Muskie's a good guy, but, up there in was it in New Hampshire, Maine, or wherever it was. He cried in the snow, and it was over then. And improvising back and forth, the head of Showtime and myself, that cinched the deal. And it was quite an experience playing him because I knew to play him like every other character I've played, there has to be something that can give me empathy to begin with. And so I read in the space of a week 2 or 3 biographies of his and looked at footage that I found. And believe it or not, I developed from being an absolute antagonist of somebody like Nixon. I think I brought some of what I found in his childhood and his tremendous ambition, and how it was always some good-looking guy like John Kennedy who displaced him. But it turns out that Showtime didn't like the whole thing, and Dick Cavett narrated it. They didn't quite get what this was doing. It was a spoof, a mock documentary. Both the gentleman who played Elvis and I picked out some of those quirks and underlined them a little bit in the performances. It showed once or twice on Showtime and then banished. But I go to conventions, people come up to me with a VHS copy of that and ask to sign it. And I've had people write and say that they thought it was so funny. But I liked it because I had to find a way to play him where even with the humor, that there is some empathy and some feeling of his vulnerabilities, which he certainly had. Not as many as our current president, but quite a few. And so it was a great acting exercise. I shot the whole thing in a couple of days, and it was mainly 2 or 3 big scenes. The center of it was nobody knows what happened between Elvis and Nixon when they were alone in the Oval Office. And so they tried to construct what might have happened in the Oval Office. And Elvis and I end up singing, My Wild Irish Ride. That's where I used to sing to Pat. And the two of them singing and harmonizing, it made them both seem, oh my God, these guys were at the top of the world, of their own worlds, the political world and the world of entertainment. Nixon would be gone in, I think, under a year, and Elvis was to die shortly. I thought that was a tremendous irony, and a part of what made me feel a little bit for Nixon is that he had been to the very top and had a hell of a time getting there, but he got there, and he made some decisions that sealed his fate, and then spent the rest of his life trying to explain his way out of it, and I don't think ever really did.
So Rick Peters, he was Elvis.
Yeah.
I will say, if you go to Google and type in I use the word need on purpose. I need to watch Elvis Meets Nixon. It comes up. You can watch it. Well, speaking of movies that are filmed and nobody knows what really happened, The Perfect Storm. That's another example. But the back half of that is, because obviously they all perished, unfortunately. That's another great movie, though. They had a little controversy.
You were positing that I was scared for my life in Vietnam. I, at one point, was scared for my life in the large tank at Warner Brothers, because in the big scene for the guy I was playing and the two women who were on this yacht with him, and a yacht that he lived on, bound for Bermuda or someplace like that. And so the big perfect storm starts assembling, and the Coast Guard commands that they be extracted from that boat, from his boat. He's pissed off about it. He said, I've been through these kinds of hurricanes and stuff before, and I've always gotten through it. We've battened down, but they wouldn't hear, but he had to go. And to be picked up, they had to jump in the water. Now, this huge tank at Warner Brothers, of course, they got nice filtered water, even though I found some cigarette butts in it. Also, it was warmed up, so, it'd be comfortable for the actors. What they didn't do, though, and we were all wearing Mae Wests, what they didn't do is have any salt in it. And the salt in water makes anything in the water more buoyant. And I jumped in and I bobbled up, and the water was here, and I had to do this to breathe. And of course, there's all kinds of things going on, water cannons, and the boat was on a thing that made it get tossed and turned. And they had green screen all the way around with dark clouds, all that stuff. So if I would have screamed out, help, nobody would have heard me. So I just had to dog paddle through the scene, and it was a pretty long scene. I really was shaken by the time I got out, because I was fighting for my life. I guess if I would have really gone under, they did have some scuba diver people as safeties, but I couldn't even get their attention. It was a heck of a movie, it really was. And that guy was right about his boat. And he wrote, or somebody interviewed him, and he said, 2 days after the big storm, the perfect storm, they found my boat on the Delmarva Peninsula. It had washed ashore, perfect shape. And not only that, but that the plastic bag in which he had his passport and wallet and keys and things, which he was going to jump off the boat with, had been left behind on the outdoor part of the yacht, and it was still there. So they would have survived, most likely, the perfect storm. The gentleman whom I played, the real person, was very pissed off about this, because there was no sense that he was right, and he shouldn't have had to jump off the boat.
Well, speaking of people that do things because they think they're right, Captain Benjamin Maxwell, The Next Generation, The Wounded, great episode. And it does turn out at the end, they allude that your intentions.
Well, they confronted something that Roddenberry did an awful lot. And I just friended his daughter, I think. He put conundrum as a part of a lot of these episodes, ethical ones, just human issues, as well as, fighting Kardashians and all that stuff. But there was something, it was like a laboratory for humanity. And in this case, the conundrum was that Captain Maxwell was wrong to have not obeyed orders, and he was going to pay for it too. By the end of the episode, he accepts that. And the one who has to get him arrested is Picard. At the very end of the episode, Picard acknowledges that although he was wrong to undermine orders, he was right about what the situation was with the Kardashians. It was this, you're right on one part, you're wrong on the other, and how does that fit together? And what should be the consequences of that? But the fun for me was singing Minstrel Boy with Colm Meaney. He lived near my family in Manhattan when he was working there, and I hadn't seen him in a long time. Sweet guy, obviously Irish as a shamrock. And I'd been a folk singer when I was younger, and Minstrel Boy was one of many songs, kind of anti-war songs, that I have done. So getting to sing that with him was very moving, and it was easy to play the kind of wistful sense that I'm not going to get out of this because I shouldn't have done what I did, and also a memory of his family getting wiped out by the Kardashians. So it was just chock full of good stuff to play. And I even learned the Star Trek thing of when you stand up, you have to pull your tunic down or it bulges. You watch Picard on any episode, the first thing he does when he stands up is pull that thing down. So I learned how to do that.
Well, it was a great scene with you and Colm. The whole episode was great. And you'd known Brent Spiner before, is that?
Yes, we are both in Big River, the Huckleberry Finn musical, and we both had a lot of fun doing that. I don't think I had these scenes with him in The Wounded, but he was certainly there. In the place where they filmed this, they have plastered all over all the walls examples of the word burgers that Data had to spit out, and they were tongue twisters, and they were loaded with this words that don't mean anything except in Star Trek land. And I thought that was funny too. It was a wonderful cast to work with.
Well, I'm sure when you go to conventions, you get a lot of attention from Trekkies, but Shawshank Redemption, likely your number one thing that people go, oh, hey, because it is one of the greatest movies of all time.
It is. And what I found out, even though it really bombed when it was released into theaters. And even after the Academy Award nominations were announced and they brought it back out, still no business. But because Ted Turner bought Castle Rock, who were the original producers, and put it on TBS, TNT, TCM in rotation, people even who had never dreamed of going to see anything that had the word Shawshank, whatever the hell that was, and redemption in it, were drawn in by it. And all over the world, people tell me in a way that's almost spiritual that when they hear those themes or hear some scene playing on the television, they have to sit down and watch the rest of it. As I say, I've been in a number of European nations and also Morocco, the South Seas, and South America. And I was doing a movie in Chile. We were doing the movie about the 33 miners who lasted for 80 days or something after a cave-in, and they were rescued. We were in Santiago to shoot some scenes with the president of Chile, which is the role I was playing. And I had a couple of days off, so I thought, I'd love to have a good Italian dinner. So I looked it up in the guide and found one, but I couldn't find it. So I was out there walking the main drag, and I went up to a young man, and I told him in my broken Spanglish, "Donde está restaurante?" and then whatever the name was. And of course, he had perfect English. And he said, "Well, I don't know where they are, but I'll ask the cab driver over here." He went over to the cab driver. Cab driver gave him the directions on how to get there. He came back to me and I said, "Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate it." And he said, "You're Bob Gunton, aren't you?" I said, "What? Or am I being obtuse?" And again, to be at the other end of the world and find someone who knew the movie that much that he even knew my name, which is, it's not a name that comes to the tip of everyone's tongue, but they know the warden. So that's just an example of people I've run into in the bathrooms and airports and all of that. And they all are, when they come up to me, they're paying homage to the movie because it means that much to them.
Do people bring Rita Hayworth posters for you to sign, or what do they do?
Yeah, I tell them the story about it. It was actually the novella was Rita Hayworth and the Shawshank Redemption. And I was told by somebody in the production that somebody figured we can't have that because Rita Hayworth is on film for about 3 seconds in the movie. And if people go to this thing thinking, Rita Hayworth, someone's going to play Rita Hayworth, and they see that, they will be pissed. So they couldn't use that. A lot of people who were, all of us loved the movie and thought it was just one of the finest scripts we'd ever read. But they said Shawshank Redemption, the title just did not draw people in. They didn't know what a Shankshaw or Shawshank was. And again, the word redemption sounds like, some candy ass religious thing. But when they saw what the movie was about, then they were hooked.
Yeah, the poster is amazing too. It's a whole combination, and I feel like it's funny. I can see where it was a name that maybe people didn't know what to wrap their head around, but now it's like, what else would you call it? It's like, and it's just amazing. Frank Darabont, I imagine, was pretty amazing. He's done so much great stuff in addition to this.
Yes, wonderful. And he wanted me right from the start, sort of like the Nixon thing, but Castle Rock said, "Yeah, we know Bob's work and all that, but is it really work out this way?" And I was doing Demolition Man at the time, totally bald, my head shaved. And I knew if I was going to play this role, I'm not going to spend 20 years of the movie time with a bald head because I wanted something that depict the time that was passing. And particularly since we shot it chronologically, anyway, Castle Rock asked for a camera audition. They got some woman in the San Fernando Valley of California who makes all of the wonderful wigs, many of the wonderful wigs that are used in movies. She made me one. It's the one you see for the first part of the movie. That's just kind of a nicely combed, looks like a Presbyterian minister, round glasses and cross on his lapel. And they sent me to New York, and Tim Robbins was there too, and he was off screen, off camera, and we did all of the scenes between the two of us, which are, I think, the only person I talked to in the whole movie. When they saw it with the wig and the toupee, it was a wig, and the glasses and my interpretation of it, again, it was mine, but Frank always wanted me to do it. And there were some big players. Everybody in Hollywood read that script, and everybody was knocked out by it. And everybody wanted a chance to get in it. And so they had some pretty big names who were, they brought in for the warden. I don't know. Frank never explained to me why, other than he liked my performance, why I was chosen, why he chose me anyway. I knew who that character was first time I picked up the script, and not because he's me by any chance, but there's something in there. And part of it is, I think the movie on one level is about light and dark. The light is Andy as he begins to unfold as a human being because of his relationship with Red, primarily. the warden, who looks like a strict disciplinarian at the beginning, but he kind of curdles and all of this bribery and stuff going on. So you have darkness and you have growing light, and darkness cannot exist with the light. So it must kill it or somehow dim it down. That's a very kind of, heady kind of way to look at it. But that gave me the energy, what the right energy was for this guy. Also what the through line was for him. And actually, for the first time in my life, I wrote an entire backstory for him. And I did it sort of for the same reason that I found in Sweeney, that having my wife and my daughter in my heart gave me a springboard into the emotion. And in this case, I had to make it up for myself, but I wrote of his early life and the shame that some of it involved, the influences, religious influences and stuff, and how he began to think of himself as a sinner. And so I do know some of the biggest sinners that you know about can present as a celestial being, because they are afraid of that darkness within them. And Andy was a hero, a fabulous hero. What he does is unbelievable. And you had to have somebody who potentially had the power of character and position to kill him off if he had to. That's why the warden, first of all, in the novella, there are 3 wardens. And Frank was brilliant enough to say, no, has to be one guy who is this source of evil. And the smarter he is, the stronger he is, then his triumph, Andy's triumph, becomes greater. It was so much fun. I really loved playing, even though it was heavy duty stuff, some of it. But I thought, to be able to be a part of that and that character. And it was one of the few times where the camera came in close because the character demanded that. And you had to see the wheels turning. And particularly in that scene, the first scene that he has with Andy, where they're kind of doing this, checking each other out with Bible verses. It's sort of like a seduction, a weird kind of, I think the warden is thinking, yeah, this guy, maybe I might be able to use him. And I don't know what's going through Andy's head. He parries very well with the Bible verses. So that becomes a bond, I guess, between them or something. But the camera came in very close for those. And I think a lot of that information actually went out to the audience watching it. There've been so many movies that I did where I was the third banana, or just the bad guy, or just the guy who delivers some of the plot and then splits. I worked as hard on them as I did on Shawshank, and it didn't have the same power because camera was out here. I was background, basically. But when it comes in here, that's when the audience gets connection with the character.
Incredible. Well, let me ask you this question. Is it hard to do that movie and then have to spend the rest of your life not having Morgan Freeman narrate it?
Yeah. It's difficult not being around him after you've been with him.
I read something. Was Morgan's voiceovers pre-recorded? Did you know them during the shooting?
I don't know. I think it was probably after, because there were, line changes and stuff. I really don't know.
The other trivia I read on this is Stephen King's only criticism was that Andy's tunnel was too round. I don't know if that's true or not.
I've never heard that one before, but it's his novella, and I guess he should be able to critique his own work or somebody else's version of his work. But he treasures the script. I know that. The movie version of it, I think he's called it one of the best of all the movies that have been made out of his books.
I would say it's right there in the top 2, if not the number 1 Stephen King of all time. Did you film 61 in Detroit?
Yes.
That's where I'm from, by the way. That's why I said that.
And that was fun too, mostly because Billy Crystal is an absolute baseball nut. He knows everything about particularly the Yankees, but others too. And the whatever the ballpark was in Detroit, I think it was about to be torn down or something for a new one. Somehow he found it to be a very good match for Yankee Stadium. And the fun was there are a bunch of us who played tiny roles in this thing, a string of cameos. He looked around and he would see these actors that he knew himself as an audience member that were now coming in and throwing in 3 lines for him. And I walked in after one of the big scenes, and I went up to Billy and I said, I look around here at the talent you've assembled here, and and the roles that we're playing. I said, I can't think of anyone else in Hollywood that I know about who could have, because it was him, gathered these people to do this. And he broke out crying because he was thinking the same thing, that these people have come to work in my little HBO or whatever it was, HBO movie. And it was a good movie, but he's just a tremendous guy. Really love him.
There was the old Tiger Stadium before they tore it down. Yeah, it was pretty cool how they transformed it. Speaking of transformations, I don't plan these pivots, but I saw some videos and then I found an FX kind of montage of this. I had no idea that you were in Ghostbusters Afterlife, but when I found out, I was like, oh my God, that is really cool. Really
Another
cool.
story. I was my agent called me up whenever this was 3 or 4 years ago when it was shot. It was before the pandemic. They said, just got an offer for you. And she named the price being offered, the salary. Whoa. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, well, it's really secret. They're calling it Rust City. And the character they want you for is the dirt farmer. I go, what the That's weird. But the money wasn't weird. So I get on the plane, go up to Calgary. I'm in the trailer getting my wardrobe on, and I'm looking down and I said, what the hell is this? This is weird. And I step out of the trailer, and the first thing I see is Bill Murray in his Ghostbuster garb. And I thought, holy I'm going to be a Ghostbuster. So they ushered me into the director, who's the son of the original. He sat me down. He said, I guess by now you know that you're going to be playing Egon Spengler, because the other 3 were already there. And I said, yeah, but, I don't look anything at all like Harold Ramis. And he said, well, we have the advantage that he's been away for many years. He's kind of this, they call him the dirt farmer, and he's grown a beard, and his hair, that great head of hair he has, is turned gray. And he said, I'm doing this movie because I wanted to launch the younger people off on the new Ghostbusters, the young people who are his grandkids. And also I wanted to close the book on the estrangement that Egon has had with his daughter. That's why at the end, as an apparition, as a spirit, as a ghost, I guess, we're going to bring you in. You're going to suddenly appear with your granddaughter, who is a wonderful actress. I wish I knew her name. She's just fantastic. And you are going to help them defeat whatever is happening at the end of the climax of the movie. He said, now we're going to do some things that will suggest an aging or aged Egon Spengler. But this isn't a thing where you put the little tabs on the body and then basically just turn that into an image, a brand new image. So we're going to do some things like put the glasses, change the hair, but I wanted an actor's eyes and mouth and body, all of that, because obviously this ghost can't speak, but he has to portray these 2 big things that he is handing off to the kids, their Ghostbuster rifle, whatever that thing is. And most importantly, that he is departing, leaving his daughter released from the resentment that she's felt about her father absolutely abandoning her. That was the challenge, to convey those things without any dialogue, to do it as close to what I think Harold Ramis might have done. I don't know. But it was quite a deal. Even talking to the the other three, and I thought this is the second time I've played a dead person for the entire movie. The first time was this amazingly weird genre film called Dead Silence, where I play this corpse that has become a marionette because of his wife, who has learned how to talk. He supposedly has a stroke, but he's a dead man. And you only know that until at the very end, the camera's here and swings around behind, and you see a carved out hole in the back. And the soup that she's supposedly feeding him is plop, plop, going down the spine and and they had to build a dummy thousands of dollars to look exactly like me for whatever that was, 4 seconds of screen time. And not long ago, I saw that the dummy was on eBay, of all things. And I thought about getting it only for my use in putting him in the seat next to me in the car and getting in the HOV lane and waiting for some cop to stop me. That would have been sweet. It'd be worth the $250 fine or whatever it was. But I didn't buy it. I'm not that much of a narcissist.
Oh my God. Dead Silence might be a little too scary for me. I don't like those kind of movies.
Yeah, I don't either, but it was fun doing it.
But it was really cool that you got to, I mean, Harold Ramis was just incredible. So it must have been such an honor to be able to bring him back. It was funny because I remember watching it and thinking, wow, this is really cool. It looks like him. I was like,
conventions that I go to, many people, they're obviously Ghostbuster lovers, but say that scene brought them to tears. And they were surprised, number one, that Egon would show up in any way, even though there's all these little Easter eggs through the script where he has left something or led the kids to, the car and all that stuff. We have pictures of me before and after when I was actually doing it, looking more or less like myself, except my hair was weird. And then after the transformation. And when I went and saw it, I thought, that was pretty good, because I saw, again, in my eyes and body language, I felt like I came pretty close to completing those two tasks for the Ghost of Egon.
You did good. You did real good. It definitely was a highlight of that movie. I loved that. I loved it a lot. I love spending time with you. This was amazing. Thank you for hanging out with me, sharing all these great stories.
I don't do many of these things anymore because I'm nearing I think the trailing off, at least, if not the end of my active working career. And so that there's not that incentive, but having finished writing my memoir, which, by the way, is the working title is, Or Am I Being Obtuse? Which, I'm afraid that if it's ever published and critics read it, it's going to be like the critic who watched The Greatest Story Ever Told, and his review was, it isn't. And if I'm setting myself up by saying, or am I being obtuse, I can just see some son of a, yeah, you are. You're very obtuse. No.
They're going to say it. It matters whether or not they really mean it or they're just being silly back, playing with the wordplay. I think it's great. Do you have a time where the memoir is coming out?
Don't know. If any of your listeners happen to be literary agents or, God forget, publishers, here I am, has lots of funny names. I worked with Meryl Streep and, of course, LuPone and Angie Dickinson and all these people. Their roles and also Sondheim and Prince. There's some, I think, interesting stories that maybe nobody else could have told about those two geniuses. That's what I'm sort of pitching for before I've even got it stuck in a book. But it's finished and it's ready to go.
Well, thank you so much for hanging. You're the best. You really are. You're not obtuse at all.
Good. Jeff, thank you so much. I enjoyed it. You've done your research. And that's always a pleasure when an old fart like me has to talk about remembrances of things past. You help jog my memory. A little bit.